I'm gonna invite the panelists to join the discussion, and we'll start this webinar slowly. I can still see people are joining, but Stephen and Charles, if you want to come on, and perhaps we should actually just start by maybe introducing ourselves. So I already mentioned it. I'm Mantis. I head up the content marketing team at Socialbakers, and then Stephen, we got you here.
Yes, so hi everybody. I head up APAC for Digimind. I've been working at the company now for a long time, helping organizations basically make sense of online data, consumer insights data, and make better strategic decisions and drive their marketing processes forwards for the last 10 years.
Yeah, thanks for coming on board. And we got Charles.
Hi everybody. My name's Charles. I'm the VP of Socialbakers across Asia Pacific. I would hope most people are at least familiar with Socialbakers and what we do. We believe content is the currency of social, and to have an effective social strategy, you need to understand what type of content, when and where across what platform, and being able to identify what audience maps to that type of content as well. So we break that down for a lot of brands and agencies globally. And we'll be talking about that later today.
Thanks so much. Just one thing maybe to start with. So this webinar is, well, there's two really important parties involved, and Digimind, and we got Stephen from Digimind, and we got Socialbakers. And I think this is a kind of an exciting moment for us because, well, we're really starting to partner very closely together. And maybe Stephen and Charles, do you want to tell us a little bit more about this partnership?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mantis. And thank you very much for inviting us to be here today. It's great working with you guys. We've got a wonderful working relationship. We've got a great relationship, not just in terms of our technology, which fits together very, very well, but also people right across the globe. And I think that that's really key when you're looking at any partnership and you're working with various different providers, especially in the MarTech space where there's lots of different tools. And quite often tools need to integrate together today. It's really important to work with partners who know each other very well and work together very well. So I think it's a very exciting time, not just in terms of best of breed technology, but also in terms of best of breed people almost, if you will.
Thanks. Charles, anything to add here?
Yeah, that was a really nice summary. It's really about being able to help you, our audience, the marketeers, make sense of data in a more streamlined and consistent manner. And to prevent data leaks, removing the need to manipulate data or possibly try and string data sets together unnecessarily. So we're providing all the information or a lot of the information that you need in a concise single platform.
Right. So we have two kind of experts from two different sides of the social media intelligence space. And just to give you context, so where do we stand, where is Digimind and Socialbakers stand? So we think of these three key areas. We got earned, owned media, and paid media. And so Digimind, you've been doing earned media for since the dawn of age, and Socialbakers, we're very much we're focused on the owned channels, and so right now we're kind of doing those two, sharing that specific area. And then recently we started focusing in Socialbakers much further into paid. So this is how kind of it's divided between us. But I'm just going to jump ahead, and I want to introduce the subject today, and then that's exactly why we're all here. And that's well, how do we connect all the dots between the earned part, the owned part, and the paid part of media? And this is what we're going to cover. But before we go into each individual section, what we'll do is we'll give you a little bit of context about where we stand in terms of the data environment, the current environment right now. There's a bit of homework to do, though. This is going to make the discussion a lot more fun. So if you look at your chat window, and when you're typing in the message, it says to column and all panelists. So if you could change that to all panelists and attendees, because when you comment, then the rest of the audience will be able to see it, and it'll just be a much more kind of fun discussion to be had. So if you could do that, I'm going to change that as well for myself. All right. And I think maybe we can start with a kind of question, and I'm curious to know, so which area is most challenging to you when you're dealing with data? Is it accessing the right data sources, which is definitely sometimes a challenge for me, is that understanding what to make of that data is actually everything about it. And sometimes I certainly feel like it's C for me. So we have answers coming in. We got B's, a lot of B's, got C's, some A's. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one feeling just overwhelmed by the entire, by the amount of data that we deal with.
Those, it's just amazing.
So I think we're going to help you understand how to access the right data and also how to make sense of it in this webinar. So I'm just going to jump ahead, and I think maybe the point I already made is that I often feel like I am lost in just too much data currently. And I think probably marketers can relate to this. It's just, and we keep adding more and more data. And why are we doing it? Well, there's just more and more marketing channels that we want to be present on. And, you know, we all have been in those stress situations when your maybe manager reaches out to you and says, what do you think about TikTok? And in the top of my mind is like, oh my God, that's another data source that we have to like unravel and figure out what to do with. And probably we'll need a separate tool for that as well. And so if you look at the current marketing environment, we are dealing with so many tools, so many sources of data to understand it, and it's difficult for us to make sense of it. I think that's a situation we can all relate to.
Hey, Mantis, an interesting point on that last slide.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Scott, or a few days ago, Scott Brinker released the MarTech landscape, and 7,000 was the number last year. It's now 8,000. So there are 8,000 tools for marketeers to try and bring some of this data together. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and it's so
data points behind as well. It just evolves out, doesn't it?
Yeah, I certainly hope we're gonna find some resolution to this problem, because it's definitely across marketing departments that I'm seeing this exact thing repeat itself. And this is one stat that I can really like that shows where the skill set really started to lie for marketers, and that is in the fact that we all need to be data analysts. And that's what marketing managers are looking for when they're hiring people for their departments, is that it's the top skill right now is being able to understand the data. And so we all are a bit of a data nerds currently in marketing. And this slide I included because I really want to make a point is that, like, why the hell are we doing this? Like, my job when I come to work every day is not to make sense of data. That's not the point. The point is to create really amazing marketing experiences for our audience. This is why we're collecting all this data. This is why we're looking at it every day. And this is why it's important to make sense of it and have the tools you need to make sense of it. And this is just a slide that we're not gonna go into maybe too much detail here, but this is the kind of the landscape. If you think of your social media tool set right now, the kind of tools you use in your marketing environment, this is where kind of listening and consumer insights fit in, and they're really overlap in the care area and as well in the kind of the content area, and you are able to really improve the customer engagement experiences on those two parts of your marketing. And we'll go into those two areas in more detail now. So we want to start with earned media, and that's really, Stephen, your area. And I'm really curious to actually hear much more from you here, because this is a part where I think I could definitely improve my skill set as a content marketing manager at Socialbakers. So I'll just let you begin here.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Mantis. I mean, I have to say that earned media and social listening is something that is super exciting because it's been around for a while. It's evolved a lot over the years, from traditional sort of brand health and sentiment analysis, really right through to what we would look at today, which is looking at proper market research and really understanding consumer insights. And you're right, that does get overwhelming for people, but it's important more than ever for brands to really understand and look at customer experience and deliver the right customer experience, especially when we look at the economical situation at the moment with COVID-19. It's really important for brands to be able to differentiate themselves. And there's a few key points that I would like to highlight today, but certainly differentiation and innovation, both around products and services, but also content, is going to be super key, I think, for brands to really succeed. and drive forwards, and very sadly, in some cases, even survive in the current climate that we have going forwards. So when I look at customer experience, because that really is the key touch point that I want to focus on here in this presentation, there's three areas that I would look to break this down over. The first part is personalization, and that's very much around content. The second part is around differentiation, and that touches more on products and the content that we create as well. And the third part is really around the customer journey. And I'll touch on those as we start to go through, and we'll explain those in more depth. So if we go to the next slide.
Yeah.
First of all, what I want to look at is really what customer experience is. And customer experience is basically how customers perceive and the expectations they have from how our company has actually treated them based on the products or service that they've received. It is their experience. And it's really important for us to first of all actually look at the voice of the customer and look at consumer insights and reverse engineer that, so that we go back and we understand exactly what our customers want to see. We want to understand exactly what their requirements are and what their behaviors are first, before we can then start to deliver, hopefully, our ultimate and best customer experience. And that also starts to lead into, on the next slide, the sources. Right. And, like we were talking about earlier, companies and marketers are drowning in data today. And it's really important, if you're looking at a certain subject or an objective, that you look at the right data set. You don't necessarily have to look at everything that's out there in order to make a decision. And this is no more true than within customer experience. So here we can start to look at both online and offline sets of data. So we could look at things like social media and review sites as our real core online channels. Of course, there's really valuable data within those sets, but we can also start to look at the information that you might hold more within your organization. So looking at data from call centers, chat, email, or even the customer surveys or focus groups that you've run, all of this information pulls together to create a holistic view to understand customer experience.
Right. And I guess in some sense, every marketing department is kind of doing this already. It's just they're doing it in silos. I imagine if I look at most of the companies that I've looked at internally, like that's the case. Like sometimes the social data just sits separately from the call center data, even though often it's about the same kind of customer experience. It's just in different channels.
Completely, and it's just not being analyzed together, right? It's sitting in this team or this team, but it's not all together as one data set, which it really needs to be, especially if you want to get that holistic view.
All right, so moving ahead.
Okay, so now we're going to look at those three touch points. So the first point was really around personalization, and like I say, this really touches on content strategy. And here, what we want to do, we want to understand the consumer. We want to do market research on our consumer. So here we're looking at a lot of social data. We really want to understand their wants, needs, desires, the things that make them tick. And we want to see what they're saying about our content, so that we can get feedback on that, so that we can improve that content and basically create something that's more relevant and something that resonates with them. We can also look at trends in data as well. So we can start looking at things like social demographic focus groups. So we might look at millennials or young families, for example. We won't necessarily use keywords to look at that data, but we'll look at all of the information coming through from maybe their social channels and start to see what's really ticking within that demographic. We can also start looking at things like known trends or unknown trends. Known trends generally are things that we already know around our business, or things that we think our customers are feeling. So it might be, for example, there, like you see in the bottom right-hand side, like drivers of call and like lists of types of call or types of feelings, or it might be around things like price, customer service, environmental impact, those kind of things. It can also be unknown trends. So whilst we've got things that we already know we want our customers to feel, the unknown trends are all equally as important, because they can give us perhaps the true sentiment of how our customers feel. And again, generally there we won't use keywords, but we'll look at things like word counts to really do innovation discovery. And I think it's also really important as well for marketers to really think about and get creative with the data. I think that this is one of the core parts of the role that is also missing. because it's easy to say, well, I'm not a data analyst. I don't necessarily know how to do that. But you can come up with ideas that that start to add value. So one of the things that we've done with one of our clients, Lux, was look at the emotional proximity of keywords. So they looked at their particular shower gels, and they wanted to see the emotional proximity of various words that related to various different emotions, to see how close they were to the brand. And they did that in each of the different countries out here in the region, so that they could get a better feel for how each of those different people in the different regions felt towards the product. And they were then able to drive the content strategy and focus it in the right area with the right messaging.
Got it. Just if I may interrupt here, just I encourage the audience to ask questions as well. Drop them in the chat, in the Q&A, wherever you feel like it's most convenient for you. We will jump to them right away. So we want this to be a discussion as well and make it as useful as we can for you. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. The next part is really looking at market trends. So this is where we're not so much looking maybe directly at our brand, but we're either looking at our products or our industry as a whole. And here, for sure, this is where we want to be looking at innovation and differentiation. So, of course, we want to be looking at product development, different types of technologies we can potentially invest into to grow our technology or grow our services. You definitely want to be looking at things like competitor products or services here. With AXA, we've got a great story where they launched an insurance plan called MediShield. And it was one that various different insurance companies had launched as well. But they were slightly late to market. So they were launching their product maybe 6 or 7 months after the competitors. And what they wanted to do was look to see how people perceive the current plans that were out there, to see which gaps are in those plans, so that they could go to market with a policy that covered absolutely all of the different touch points that were relevant to the clients or to the consumers. And they managed to do that. So they looked at the competitors, they looked at the gaps, they created a great plan, and within 4 months of launching, they were the #1 policy on the market. And that was all directly from social data and doing that, should we say, consumer research. The other important thing is to really look at historical data as well, especially if you're looking at market trends, because you want to see how things trend over time, so that you can start to have more conviction in the prediction of future trends and future topics.
Stephen, if I may ask a question from the audience about something you mentioned just a little bit earlier, and that was emotional proximity. So could you elaborate on that point, on the emotional proximity point? How did the brand re-optimize for various countries that have different emotional words? That's the question from Caitlin. Caitlin, thanks for asking.
So in that particular situation, they already had listed the different emotions. So they knew the different emotions that that resonated with their consumers. And I think they'd gathered that from various different focus groups or different reports that they'd run before. So they knew the different the different emotions. And they then created various different queries to say, okay, if this particular emotion, let's say it's love, was five words away from the brand, then it would have a score of 1. If it was 10 words away, it would have a score of 2. So they really looked at that, and they had a whole list of different emotions, and they basically created like some kind of ranking system. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they re-optimized it, but they basically looked at the various different emotions within each country, and they created a ranking system to see what resonated with the local marketplace. But for sure, it could have been something where they looked at those different emotions within each country and started to see how people reacted to those, if in general even, and if they were talking more about love or whatever the emotion was. So you could definitely do a bigger study on that within each country.
Okay. If I can see there's a question in Q&A, I cannot access the Q&A. So if one of you could check it out, if it's a question we should answer right away, let me know. We'll pause and answer it.
Do you have any tool or way to gather the customer insight data? So yeah, for sure. Within Digimind, we gather that information. So like you saw on the previous slides, we collect information from all of those different data points. And particularly in social data, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that marketers have, because it's such a vast amount of data, and there's many different types of information that come back, sometimes comments, posts, ads even. We have different ways within our queries to start filtering that information down and displaying only the comments, which are really the important parts.
Right. All right.
What's also interesting within market trends as well is, and industry trends, is to start looking at things or technologies or services that could potentially impact your industry, like augmented reality. How does that come into play? How do people talk about that subject? And how does it impact our products? Is that something maybe that we could launch and go to market with to differentiate ourselves? Or maybe looking at wider subjects like even COVID-19. Pretty much all of our clients at the moment are asking us to see how COVID-19 is impacting their industry. How are people talking about it within their industry, and how should they best communicate to their audiences, which is a massive point again at the moment. You know, are there particular keywords that they should put in their messaging, and particular things that people want to see within their industry to basically keep the right relationships and get the right messaging out. Okay, and the last point really here is the customer journey. So this is very much looking at retention and developing business. So here what's really cool is that you can map out the different stages of the customer journey based on your industry. So that's a first step. And then you can start to look at the various different steps within that journey. So you can identify different desires, expectations, purchase or post-purchase decisions. You can look a lot more at engagement at these stages. So maybe real-time engagement for purchase decisions, and maybe engagement for post-purchase and customer retention. And here we're really looking at things like customer service and trying to understand the trends within customer service, but then making sure that we answer those messages in the right way, or answer those complaints or praises in the right way to keep that customer experience as high as we possibly can. And here again, we might look a lot at maybe call center data or consumer reviews to see how they influence different prospects. It's also interesting to see how you can break down different points of the customer journey as well. So at each of the different stages, for example, if you're looking at sales conversion, you might be able to break that down even further to see what's really important within sales conversion. Again, maybe you might want to start engaging with consumers in real time on some of that data, or maybe you might want to start creating different pieces of content to help support that part of the customer journey.
All right, perfect. And this is where does Digimind fit into this?
Yeah, exactly. And this is where it all goes. And I think one of the great things about, I'm not just going to say social data, but I'll say online data and data in general, is that it can be used to feed and answer questions at all different stages of the organization, many different departments to many different people. So of course, consumer insights and trends is massive. Brand protection is huge. All brands at the moment need to manage their online reputation, see themselves through crises, see how that compares to various competitors, and look at those campaigns, see how those campaigns are performing, and are really making sure that we're optimizing the campaigns so that we get in the right engagement level and we're able to drive our business forwards. And also looking at competitive intelligence. And what's cool here is that you can do competitive intelligence from a traditional sort of marketing point of view, where you might look more around competitor benchmarking, share of voice, that kind of thing. But you can also look at it more from a business strategy point of view. So what are my competitors actually doing in terms of business events like mergers and acquisitions, product announcements, partnerships, nominations for like senior executives? Maybe you want to look at external risks across the different industries. Maybe you even want to start looking at different suppliers. There's many different ways that you can use this data to drive all parts of the organization. And it's also important for marketers to think then about how they deliver that information into the business. What are the objectives of the teams and the business units that they're answering, and how do they want to deliver that information, and what's important to each individual person? And that's a whole nother conversation, but
right,
very interesting.
Yeah. And so of course the question is then, how does this fit in with own media, which we'll get to in a second, but maybe is there something that you would like to highlight to the audience from the takeaways? And of course, we'll share the deck with everyone after the webinar, and you'll be able to go through this checklist later on your own. But is there anything that, Stephen, you'd like to highlight now?
Yeah, I would say certainly from a Social Bakers and Digimind point of view, certainly around performance of content and products. This is massive because we can really help drive the strategy there. And Social Bakers are the masters of really understanding the performance and benchmarking the performance of that content. And also looking at engagement. We know that engagement and building stronger relationships is more important than ever. We know the part that that plays in customer experience. And delivering a great customer experience. And again, we're the tool to help get that information, to collect that data. And Social Bakers fit very seamlessly into that when it comes to engagement and delivering the right messages to the consumers. I guess to just touch on some of the takeaways, basically social listening is massive in terms of helping you be consumer centric and do big market research studies on your consumers. It's important to get the data right. It's important to make sure that you know the sources and that you have access to all those sources and that you currently monitor them. And I would say if you don't currently do that, it's probably something that you should start thinking about. And it's something that you should really start building into your marketing strategy to understand your consumers. And finally, I would say, think about the questions that you want to ask. Think about what you want to ask your consumers. Think about the known trends, the known topics that you want to understand. But also try to take that open-minded approach and learn the things that you don't know. And try to discover those unknown trends because they're going to be the things that really help you to innovate and differentiate what you do.
Yeah. Is there anything that we want to grab from the Q&A before we move to the next section?
So there's one question there from Hinsex. So we're looking at how accurate does AI and ML enable consumer insights? So yeah, that's a good point. This is something that's been developing a lot over the last couple of years, and it's really cool technology. We've worked on that a lot. I think it's something that requires a little bit of human knowledge. I think as with any of these types of projects, you need to put some human intelligence behind this first of all to say, yeah, this is really interesting for this particular subject. But in terms of development and going forwards, the accuracy of artificial intelligence, especially around tags, is really high, and I would say as close to 100% as you can get. Certainly speaking from Digimind's point of view, is something that's working very well on our solution. But I would say you can't get away from that human intelligence part, whether it's sort of fueling the start of the AI or whether it's delivering insights into the business. You can't get fooled into thinking that technology is going to be the be all and end all. As marketers, we have to put our own insights into this and really do analysis and add our own intelligence into this. And that's also something that Digimind does a lot of with our clients. We also support and deliver those insight reports to our clients to aid that, because we know that it's not easy for all brands, and it's an emerging skill set, shall we say.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. So obviously now the question is, how does this connect to own media? And we'll get to that in a second, but just a little bit to paint the context with own media. It's a bit of it's very different what it was a couple of years ago. And it's just because of sheer amount of volume of content that we're producing right now. And that's where it started to get really tricky, is that it became really difficult to make sense of it, and even on your own channels. So I'd like to play a little quiz with the audience. If you can guess how many posts these brands that I think we all know published in 2020 alone for AirAsia. Stephen, Charles, do you want to make a guess?
AirAsia, I'm going to take a guess, say, I don't know, over 200. That's as close.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I'll say over 500 for that. For ColourPop.
So we got you. So Charles, you got it pretty much on point. ColourPop, obviously, very much a loved beauty brand, very strong Instagram game.
Mantis, why don't we ask the audience, our participants, how many they think? Let's do that.
What do you guys think?
So audience, let's open that up to you. How many posts this year of ColourPop?
People say plus for ColourPop.
800, 300, 500 plus, more than 1,000. So we're going into 1,000 territory with ColourPop.
Yeah.
Mantis, put them out of their pain. How many?
So 1,500 in 2020. That is a lot of posts. That is so much content.
So we're going up here, right? We've gone from 267 to 1,500. Surely Oreo's then got to be 3,000, guys. How many for Oreo? Let's put that in the box. Let's have a bit of
900, 4,000.
Anyone who gets it right will send you a Starbucks voucher or something similar for the value of $25, or the person that gets it closest. Let's do that, Mantis.
Perfect.
Do it, but
all right.
we'll figure that one out.
6,000. Wait, we're out of hand here.
Brilliant, Mantis. Ah,
651. But I think the point I'm trying to make it that forget it. 651 posts in 2020. Can you even make sense of like the last? Can you remember the 10 last posts your brand did on each channel? And can you remember which post was actually the best of those 10? And I'm someone who's in our platform daily, and I can't remember it. And that's something that, you know, where we really have to merge technology with human insights, is because the amount of information that we're supposed to be looking at today is just way more than we can really capture in our minds. And if we look at social media, maybe where it was in 2010, maybe you could do it. Maybe you could kind of figure out what's working best if you just looked at your feed, you know, but nowadays it's just impossible because of the sheer amount of metrics that you're looking at for all of your own channels. And, you know, think about stories. And as marketers, we also started to get much better with attribution of your social efforts. So we started looking at conversions, at web traffic, at referral traffic. And it's a mission impossible to some degree if you're actually not using any kind of technology to help you make sense of it.
Mantis, could I just say something there?
Yeah, of course.
On the slide, if you don't mind, right? So, you know, what were the numbers? 267, 1,500, and 600, something like that. There are 3 points to take into note.
Mm-hmm.
One is on the consumer side, as you said, Mantis, what do consumers remember? Do they remember it all? Do you internally remember it all?
Right.
So what is it from the consumer, right? What do you want the consumer to take away from all that content? I think that's one really important thing to think about. And I'm not saying, hey, we should do, you know, one piece of content a week. And I'm not saying we should do 150 pieces of content a week, but
Mm-hmm.
you've got to understand, what is it that the consumer wants from this? That's one thing. And we always focus on that side of the business. One part that brands don't really think about so much is the internal fatigue, right? There's only so much content and so much creativity that your internal teams or your agencies can have, right? Ask them to come up with an idea, no problem, amazing. Ask them to come up with maybe 20 ideas, phenomenal, perfect. But then you start to ask them to come up with 200 ideas, 1,500
Right.
ideas, 600 ideas. There's a long tail of creativity. And that starts to dry things out, because as that long tail of creativity starts to then make its way into the social channels, that's then also shared with the consumers consuming the content. And there's that long tail of returns and some of the metrics that you're talking about here. And that's the third point. What can you do with all this data anyway? If you're doing that many posts, are you actually looking at those insights to understand what does that mean for my audience? And I think it's not just about the volume of data, it's not just about the creativity, but it's what does it mean for me as a brand and my consumers' relationship with me?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And you really feel it that inside our marketing department, there's moments where you have this feeling of being overwhelmed. And the worst thing to being creative is being stressed out or overwhelmed. Then you just can't deliver anything of value in that mindset. This is just a nice data point that I wanted to include, and it's similar to the first one in the beginning of the presentation, is that it just seems that it's a priority for CMOs, it's a priority for marketing managers in terms of the skill set that we're hiring and the tools that we need. There's an obvious need to make sense of this data. I think there's not more need to add here. And I already mentioned that really the solution is the merge of the two technologies, let's say, the human technology and the Socialbakers and Digimind technology. My
brain looks like the one on the right.
Yeah, well, mine definitely doesn't look like the one on the left.
So And of course, I mentioned it briefly, like what has happened to social media is that it got a lot more, let's say, serious and serious in the sense that it has become critical to business and measuring ROI and driving ROI for your business. And so we had to get a lot more clever with how we track everything we do on social media. And right now, if you are currently unable to connect the dot between what you're doing on your social channels and what is actually uh, what kind of tangible business results that's bringing, I think there's a problem. So there's really, over the past couple of years, for sure, there's been a huge focus in attribution of your social media efforts. And we'll include this chart for you to kind of follow what kind of metrics should you be looking at as you go down the marketing funnel. And yeah, Charles, you mentioned it when we were discussing this presentation before, that it has really become about integrating all your analytics solutions and all your data into one place. Can you add more here, perhaps?
Yeah, I can ask a lot. I can talk about this a lot, Mantis. Before I do, I would love to ask our audience a question. I'd like to know if you could just put into the chat function, how many SaaS solutions or marketing or data points are you accessing on a regular basis, let's say in a week? So that's tools like Socialbakers, Digimind, Google Analytics, HubSpot, Marketo, maybe even Salesforce and those solutions, right? So we know there's 8,000 in this ecosystem, but how many do you have? And SEO solutions, so you've got Google in. Look, I'm running out of list, but the list is 8,000 long. It'd be really interesting to see some of these numbers. They're sort of single figures. Guys, keep them going in. It'd be really interesting to see two. Not bad. You've got it under control.
5, 6. 6 is a common number. None at the moment. 5 a week.
Okay. Look, you get an idea, right? So let's put it this way. Let's say that common number, Mantis, was 6. If you're looking at 6 different applications a week or solutions a week, that's 6 different data points. And that's probably 6 different data points that don't necessarily talk to one another or share common metrics. And there could be timestamp differences, there could be definition differences, label differences. So nothing talks to one another. And the challenge is that then you're trying to pull or integrate or consolidate all this information into something that makes sense. And there was that slide a few moments ago, Mantis, you showed the slide, CMOs want this. But I don't know if CMOs want more marketing analytics or they want insights, right? That they want to know the insights. I don't think CMOs, that they need to get granular on some of the data, micro, but generally it's a macro view that they need and they require. And then if we go back to that slide we're on, Mantis, I appreciate that. It's how do you then pull all this information together to be able to make sense and be able to take your way from Excel, to take your way out of G Sheets or whatever solutions you're using to have a collaborative view. And I think that's the most important thing here. And this is a lot about what the Socialbakers and Digimind partnership was, bringing everything together so everyone in the organization could have a collaborative view. Whether you are the CMO, VP of marketing, head of digital, head of social, or whether you are someone who's in the weeds every single day, creating content, posting content around community management, it's about that collaborative view and having a single source of truth. So all this information can come together and you work together to come to reach similar conclusions. And I think that's really important when we're talking about this integrated view. And when you do have 8,000 platforms to look at, I don't think it's about choosing one of 8,000. It's maybe choosing about 10 or 15 of that. Yeah. Again, that single source of truth is key to reach the objective. And I think that's a really key point to push through.
Yeah, thanks so much, Charles. I think this is something that you were mentioning as well before this presentation, that I thought it was a really good point, is that there's a big difference with how you look at data and what you kind of seek out in data. Can you walk us through these 2 points here?
Yeah, thanks, Mantis. You put me on the spot on this one. I hadn't seen the slide before. This was on, I I love listening to podcasts, and I was preparing with a webinar with Vayner Media, Aaron at Vayner Media, and it was a really interesting podcast. And I was thinking about how do marketeers derive at conclusions. There are some people that leverage data to then come to their conclusion, derive that conclusion. Or there are some people that have a conclusion and what they want, the point that they want to come to, and then they just pick the best data to force that position through. So it's what they want, but they're just cherry picking that data to make it fit for them. So is it sentiment leading fundamentals or fundamentals leading sentiment? And there has to be a shift where it is now becoming a data first ecosystem in which we operate, and letting that define the narrative rather than subjective values and sentiment defining a narrative. And I think it's a very, very hard task for a lot of people, especially CMOs, but I hope it will start to shift as digitally native individuals then step into more senior marketing positions, and they are more comfortable in relying on the data to come to these conclusions. So that's what I think about.
No, it's a nice way to look at it. And you see that so many times marketers kind of fall for this, where they need to, well, their jobs are often on the line, you know, and they often seek to somehow fit the data, fit their story. And it's really, we should be doing the other thing.
But Mantis, it's not easy for them, right? Because again, if you're using 6 or 7 solutions to come to find that narrative, what solution do you trust, or what's the priority of those solutions, or where do you start? How do you bring this data together? And that's the challenge for so many marketeers now. Where do I start? And they just don't know. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't know if I was them. It's a very, very hard challenge for them. And then at the same time, you're trying to meet your CMO's expectations on what is required. And it can become a real sort of challenge.
I also think this is where brands like Digimind and Socialbakers can come in, because we can also offer that expertise to really start to help sort of set those objectives, and maybe take an external view almost as a consultancy to look at the business in a different way, and really start to look at what are the key objectives, what are we trying to achieve. And then again, like I said earlier, you almost have to sort of reverse engineer it and go backwards, so that you finally get to that question and get to the data points. But I totally agree that when you're almost manipulating the data to fit what you want, it defeats the purpose, really. So
there's a lot of comments coming in for the chat where I think people really find this discussion quite interesting here, and Carmen is saying probably that's where testing comes into play to validate some of these narratives.
Carmen, we got a nice slide on that in a minute, where I think testing comes into this. So we can talk a little bit more about that, and it'd be nice to get the dialogue coming through the Q&A. Nice job.
Yeah. So just very briefly, I wanted to include one example that recently, I think it was our team in the US that was during this past couple of months. It was a crazy time for everyone, but for the airlines industry especially, and they were helping an airline client kind of get through the tricky situation. So the way they were looking at the landscape, they're essentially were analyzing how is the sentiment changing week by week, essentially in the entire industry. And they realized that this isn't particularly going well. So we got to monitor everything really closely. And so they monitored the competitors and what the competitors are doing. And they were analyzing those conversations to really craft the responses in a way that they knew, like, this is the best response you can possibly craft in a way where it's not going to induce negative sentiment. And in the end, they were able to crack it for the specific airline client. And they asked not to be disclosed, the specific client, but they managed to come out of this with overall more positive sentiment as opposed to negative sentiment. So that was a really, really nice use case of analytics. And it actually leads to a point that, Charles, you wanted to mention, that it's about a process. It's a kind of a circular process to get this right.
Yeah, thanks, Mantis. As simple as this slide looks, it's exceptionally complex in the thinking and the process. And we'll start in the top left with unstructured. So that's the unknown unknown. And that's very much where Digimind comes into play. There's all this dialogue and all this communication and all this sentiment happening on the web, on social, in Google searches, on Reddit, all these just hundreds of data sources, and these conversations happening about your brand or about your industry that you don't even know exist. These conversations, what are they about? Are they positive? Are they negative? Are they forward looking? Are they backward looking? You know, and it's about trying to understand that unstructured information and then bringing it to the structured, so the known unknown. And Carmen, I'm going to address your point here about the testing in a moment. So it's about, if you can understand, you know what's going on, but you don't quite know how to make sense of it yet. So you've seen there's something out there in the ecosystem, you have no idea what it is. You're leveraging a solution like Digimind to kind of bring that together to then being able to compartmentalize or build cohorts around that data. So you can start to then come into that concentrated area, that known unknown, how you can specifically rate to that tone, how you can communicate to that tone, that theme, that subject, even that audience. What is that audience type? What are their other interests of that audience? Because then I can appeal, or I can structure my content relative to the interests of that particular content. So there's, and a lot of brands will go, okay, we know what's happening, we get to structured and then concentrated, but you'll see this as a loop, because innovative and creative brands are continually trying to break themselves. So they'll get to that known, okay, we've got a great product, a great service, this is what people are saying about us, whether it's the sentiment is positive or negative. But if they just if they stop there, then ultimately that brand or that product or that solution will die, and they need to continually reinvent themselves. And that's why they're constantly then coming back to unstructured to be able to say, okay, now what's happening, now what's evolving. And Carmen, to your point, you know, about doing the testing and the A/B testing and multivariate testing, whether that's of messaging, whether it's of products or solutions, that comes after the known to take it back into the unknown territory, so you can keep evolving and listening and understanding. And whether that's just tweaks to content or tweaks to creative, or that could even be new manufacturing lines or new services if you're a hotel group or an airline, really just being able to figure things out and why they're happening, and then bringing them in this continuous cycle to be able to build programs around it, test it, is it working, and then putting it back out into the ecosystem. And look, what are the latest numbers people accessing social media today? 3 billion apps accessing Facebook. That includes Messenger, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. 3 billion people. There's some amazing insights out there. And that's why bringing all this together and being able to communicate that back internally and then to your audience is very favorable.
Yeah, Charles, actually, would we be able to maybe add to this or answer Calvin's question from the chat in relation to this? So Calvin is asking, between social listening and social analytics, does any one of them come before each other in terms of supporting the social media operations? Meaning, should I perform social analytics first before social listening? So I think this actually, the circle idea answers part of that question.
Right. Charles, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, no, go for it, Steve. Let me
Steve, go.
Yes, I was just going to say, and I think probably Mantas, we both had the same, and probably Charles as well, we all had the same thought process as we're looking at that circle. But very much, Kelvin, I would say you need to be doing everything at the same time. You're constantly putting content out, and you need to see that performance as the starting point at the moment. But you also constantly need to be understanding your industry, understanding your consumers to create more engaging content and drive that strategy and constantly see that on an evolving scale all the time. It's not a case of just running a quick research project in your industry and then you stop. It constantly goes on, and that will constantly evolve forever. So to answer that question is very much a case of running both solutions at the same time. You need to be listening to what's happening and what's out there to drive your strategies, but you also need to be monitoring the performance of that right at the same moment.
Yeah. It's hard not to agree with that, right, Steve? And it's also, you know, depending where you are in your life cycle, and you can look at, you can take this model and apply it to different layers within your organization. Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it my brand? Is it my people? So depending on where you are with that particular layer of the organization would also dictate where you start. But as you see here, that they're constantly handing over to one another, where unstructured is Digimind, structured is a combination of Digimind and Socialbakers, and then concentrated sort of deviates a little bit more towards Socialbakers. So you can't start and stop, start and stop. It's a continuous evolution of your organization, of your products and your brands and your services and your consumers. Don't forget, your consumers or your prospects, they're not standing still. And your competitors are not standing still. There are constantly new things happening in the market. You know, coming back to the MarTech landscape, last year there was 7,000. And I remember speaking to Scott at the time, and Scott said, yeah, I don't think it can get any bigger. And now there's 8,000. Now we haven't added 1,000. We probably added about 1,500, and we lost 500 from last year. So there's this continual evolution of new products and new services and perceptions. So I don't think you can have one on or one off. You need them both on full time.
Yeah, I just want to briefly take 5 minutes to discuss how paid fits into this entire landscape, if we may. So we're going to share the slides after the presentation, and you'll be able to go through this checklist and ask the key questions to help you guide your decisions forward. But if we think about paid media and just how important it has become overall in the marketing mix, there's two problems that kind of emerged with that. And I think, Charles, we'll get to that in a second. You had a really good point. Well, first need is that the need for transparency and accountability and trust. And it stems from the second problem, actually, but is the fact that we somehow, paid area somehow sits separately, and the data is very separate from the rest of the marketing department. And if you kind of think of like who owns paid data right now, so it could be an agency, it could be maybe headquarters, it could be separate performance marketing teams, and those teams rarely communicate with the rest of the marketing department. And so this is kind of where, if we remember the slide in the beginning of the presentation, if we think of earned and don't kind of working together, I think by now, paid is usually very separate. Well, why is that happening, Charles?
Hey, good question. Maybe it's silos within teams or different teams building it out, maybe different objectives, different budgets, different types of budgets, a different understanding of their KPIs, which are driving earned, owned, or paid. I think the key point here is, and I know Stephen's got things to add here as well, is that paid is so often looked in isolation. But again, if you don't understand what people are speaking about and how they're engaging with you and what are some of the key messages that they're talking about you, how can you effectively do paid campaigns to learn from earned and owned and bring that into paid? A great example on a slight tangent is in Europe, La Redoute. They're an e-commerce brand with a lot of history. They took data from influencers and the insights from influencer campaigns and then applied that to their website. So what content were people engaging with their influencers, the top products, the top type of content, what language was being used, and then they applied that to web. And it was a we've got some amazing stats to talk about their performance, but paid can't be treated, whether it's influencer, whether it's even programmatic or outside of social, it can't be treated in isolation, because you have to have a continuous story, a continuous messaging and understanding what people like and what they don't like. And so these teams somehow need to integrate or collaborate with knowledge. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important for companies to use the data that they get from the owned and earned to also drive the paid, and make sure that they're getting the right results from the bucks that they're spending. That's more important now than ever, and especially with budgets being tough at the moment. And again, I go back to COVID and the economical situation. It's important that brands are spending their money in the right way, and they need to back that paid up with the right data. They need to be putting it on the right platforms in the right way, in the right content format, and to drive the right performance for their business. So even though it's kind of separate, it's arguably one of the most important parts of the cycle.
The crazy thing is that sometimes paid data actually sits outside their organization. So sometimes it sits in an agency, and sometimes CMOs or whoever head of marketing, they don't even have access at it on a daily basis. Like it could be like a monthly report or something that they get, or maybe quarterly even, you know. And it's a pretty strange situation where it's an area where you spend really the most sometimes, but you have the least amount of visibility. And I can't see that being the way moving forward.
Mantis, that's the perfect explanation as why to Socialbakers then decided to incorporate a paid module within our suite. So everyone, and I mean everyone within the organization, has some visibility into the performance and what that spend is generating real time. Mm-hmm. Because as you say, it is separate, it's within teams, but for this to work, there has to be collaboration at so many different levels of the organization and so many different levels of the media. And until we get to that 100% that point of close to, you know, perfect collaboration, CMOs are never really going to know what works and what doesn't work. So a lot of what we've been doing at Socialbakers is incorporating that into this Venn diagram. So a lot of that information can then be looked at and mapped across earned and owned. Again, coming back to that cycle.
Yeah. There's a point that you made earlier, Charles, that, you know, how do you know what to advertise if you're not actually connecting the dots between their earned and owned? So I think this is a good point to take away. I want to leave some space also for the discussion with the audience and to get their questions answered. So again, we're going to share the deck, and all the questions and takeaways are going to be there, and you're able to go through them. And maybe just a point to finish off. Charles, do you want to expand here? I think this was your idea.
But I think it's applicable to Stephen as well. Look, we both have great solutions and great customers that we work with, and solving some pretty big problems for brands of all different sizes, you know, in the region and globally. But bringing us together, we knew we both had very strong data sets, a very strong message individually, but by bringing everything together within the platform, so marketers only have to, you know, one username, one password to access all this amazing information and these insights to generate the knowledge that they need to take their organizations forward. I just thought this was the perfect quote. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Now, I don't think Aristotle wore Ray-Bans. It's a nice addition. He's certainly cool enough to, but I think it's a really important point that I don't believe marketers will ever use a solution of one or two, but where they can start to consolidate information, it's going to bring a lot of value to how they think and how they approach problems.
Yeah, of course. And the Q&A, and of course, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. We'll be happy to answer any of the questions and to follow up. You know, it's available anytime. So, and of course, thank you for really asking a lot of questions through this webinar as well. It was a really nice conversation. But if you want to drop the really difficult questions right now, please do. We'll try to answer them. Take a few minutes to answer them. Maybe actually, Charles and Stephen, can I ask you a question? So if people are interested in Digimind and Socialbakers as a combination of solutions that they use, what would that combination what would that partnership look like for them as a user of the two platforms?
Well, technically, and Stephen, I hope you agree with this, but technically they wouldn't really know they're on two platforms, and that's the beauty of what we've been working towards. Everything is combined and consolidated. From the very beginning, it's just one point of contact or sort of joint contact through the sales process. And then when they get access to the platform, Digimind data is incorporated with the Socialbakers data and insights. They're having to access one platform. And then Stephen and I work very closely together to ensure a single consumer experience with our customer success managers to be able to answer the questions that the marketers need to answer. So it's you wouldn't really understand that there were two platforms together. And I think that's what we've worked really hard to achieve, that consistency across the platforms. Do you agree, Stephen?
Yeah, completely. I mean, obviously, we've both got our own expertise and skill sets with the data that we both collect. But I think it's from what we've seen so far, and I wouldn't just say recently, but I would say over the years. You know, this is something we've been working on for a long time, and working on joint projects for a long time. It's a very seamless process. I think what's quite exciting about the interface is that you very much would not see that it's two solutions. It very much is Digimind's interface within the Socialbakers suite, and it looks like one tool, and it is one tool. So that's very, very cool, and that's very exciting. And I think there's a lot of time-saving elements and aspects to be gathered from that and gained from that. But certainly working with the solution teams. I think that's also something that that our clients have enjoyed, and we do that hand in hand to basically both get success. We both got the same goals. We're there to ensure client happiness, right? So it's a very nice partnership, and it works very well.
Perfect. Yeah. So anyone's free to sign up and test the either of the platforms, and as well, if you once you get the email, feel free to respond and ask for a demo, and we'll get to you right away. And I just want to thank everyone for participating, especially the audience, and especially Stephen, you and Charles, you too. This has been a really interesting conversation and very useful personally to me.
Thanks, Mantis. Hey,
Thank you.
to the audience, looks, all of our contact details are there. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. Both Stephen and I and Mantis share some amazing content, whether it's through our company blogs or our own personal views with what's happening in the ecosystem. I can't imagine there's many doppelgangers of any of our names. So you just add us on LinkedIn and get access to some amazing content and insights, and then we can even chat further if you've got any questions.
Yeah. So take care, everyone. Thanks so much.
Everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, guys.